Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I just want to introduce myself briefly. My name is Charlie Stegman. I am one of the partners with Aspire Consulting. I've been in and around PeopleSoft for 18 years. I'm going to pause here for a second. Can everyone go on mute, please? I don't think I have the ability to mute everybody.
Charlie, I'll mute everyone except for you.
Thank you. So I've been in and around PeopleSoft.
Charlie, can you unmute yourself? I muted everyone, but you have to unmute yourself. Oh, that's what the problem is. Where is this phone? Hold on, just 1 minute. We're getting Charlie to unmute his line. Is that you, Charlie?
Okay, how about now?
Perfect, I can hear you.
All right. So just a little bit more about Aspire. We were founded in 2006. We are based in the US and do work all across the US, and we're based here in St. Louis. I'm going to be focusing the forms in the FSCM space. We will talk about the HCM space. The functionality of forms is the same in either one, but everything I built out was in the FSCM space. So, but the functionality will be the exact same. So right now up on my screen, hopefully you guys can see my screen still. You can see a capital project request form. This is the form that we're going to basically replicate in PeopleSoft with the forms tool. The purpose of the forms tool within the application is to basically take those paper forms that you have, or those pseudo-electronic Microsoft Word or Excel or whatever forms that you may have, bring them into your application, so trying to centralize all your processes, attach the approval framework engine to it. That's the approval process that it uses, which just gives you the ability to better track and audit what's going on with those forms. Also, once the forms are in your application, you can do any possible reporting that you might want on them, because all the data is saved off in tables. And because it's considered configuration and not a customization, you don't have to worry about PUM updates causing any problems for your forms as a customization or any tools upgrades from that end. So with that being said, the goal again is to replicate this form. You'll see that we've got some fields on here that are just free to type in. We've got some drop downs for pick options. So we're going to show you how to replicate these sorts of things. within the application itself. Before you get started with the actual form builder itself, there's some things that you want to actually set up first to ease your building process and make sure you have all your building blocks in place, because you're going to go through a form wizard, and that wizard doesn't save the form the initial time through until you make it through all steps. So if you're trying to avoid going back and forth on it when you're doing the design phase, it's helpful if you can do some of these building blocks up front so you don't have to exit out and lose your work or scroll all the way through things. So the first thing that you really want to do is you want to identify, are there going to be any prompt tables that I want to actually include in my form? So obviously these are things just like any other page in PeopleSoft that a user can click the little looking glass and pull down a valid value, and it helps enforce data integrity. We're going to use the business unit one that's here and the department table and the project. Upon delivery, this whole setup here is empty, so there are no predefined prompt tables for you to use in forms. So any that you want to use, you're going to have to populate yourself. This will pull in delivered tables, custom records, any views. It works for all of those items. The other piece that you want to make sure is set up and working is your approver list. So for those that are familiar or maybe not familiar with PeopleSoft's approval framework engine, it uses the approver list from there to build its workflow out, and then it actually sits in the approval framework configuration itself. So if you need any new user lists set up, you want to make sure that those are set up ahead of time. So I've got some here already that I've gone ahead and built out. So I've got these built out. We'll see how they're used as we go through. So those are the two main building blocks you want up front. Once you get those in place, then you can actually start building with the forms. Some of you may be wondering why I'm not in the fluid form builder. Part of the reason why is because the fluid form builder actually does have some limitations. We'll talk about those a little bit later. The full robust capabilities of forms actually sits down in the native navigation of the tool. The fluid form builder is great for quick form building, simple form building, but if you want to have more spit and polish and you want to do some other things, you really want to use the native form builder tool itself. So let's pick up. So I've got one already in design here. As I mentioned, when you do the design of form, it pulls you through a wizard with 6 train stops. The first one is basic information. What this is going to control when you release your form into the wild is the effective date limits when the form is available. So obviously the further back you date it, it's always available. If you do not put an end date, it's always available. If you future date the form, it's only available when the system date hits that time frame, or until if you put an end date, it'll be available up until that end date. The label you put here is the value that you would see in the menus. So when somebody's searching through the menus to find your form, that was the value they will see. The long description is used to just provide more information about it for documentation purposes and better understand what the form's supposed to do. And the owner ID. So the owner ID is the only user that can actually modify the form. So if you've got forms attached to specific users, whoever built them, they're the only ones that are going to be able to modify it in the future. There is a form administrator role that can reassign forms to different users. So it's either the form administrator can transfer a form to somebody else, or the form owner can transfer it to somebody else. So you want to be mindful as you're building these forms who they ultimately need to sit with from a long-term maintenance perspective. The next stop on our train is going to be the instructions, which is basically free-form text. It allows rich text formatting, so you can do color, bold, underline, italics. You have bullet points, you can do grids, you can have links, you can have a line for separation, you can put images in, all of those things. This is an optional step. You do not have to populate this at all. The whole point here is basically to give your users who are going to be populating the form maybe more instructions on why they're using the form, how to use it. If they run into an issue, who to contact. You can put all that here in a nice text block for them to see and use.
Charlie, this is Lisa. Really quick, we had a question from the chat. What version of tools, apps are you using here?
This particular version, I believe, is 8.5.7. The HR version that we'll see in a little bit is 8.5.8. Though
Okay.
I tested in both and the functions have not changed. They're the same.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. So to hit hard now, so the form field step 3 is where the bulk of your building and playing with your forms is going to take place. I obviously already have a lot of stuff pre-populated here, and I did that to save on time, but we're going to go through everything on here to help you guys understand how all this functions and what it does and interacts with the end product of the form that users fill in. So let's talk about the labels first. The label is what a user will actually see on the form when they interact with it. However, if you don't like this value, you can change it on the details tab. We'll see that in a little bit, because you are limited to about 18 characters or so within the label itself. So you may not be able to put the value in that you want. Additionally, any label you put in has to be unique. So you cannot repeat values within the label column itself. The use type and length, these are sort of tied together. So there are 9 different types that you can have. And then depending on the type you choose, it's going to dictate the length. Now, there's actually not an unlimited number of fields that you can have in a form. It may seem that way because when you look at this, there's nothing that indicates, oh, when I pick text, I only have X number of fields back. When you fill out a form, once it's done and users start populating it, all that data gets stored out to a table called form_SD. And if we actually look at the structure of this, we'll see that there's 122 fields, of which 3 are the keys, so that leaves 119 fields left. Those 119 fields are basically what are used to when you build out your form. The only type that does not go to this table is the sections. Sections are used basically to break up your form, or like put headers in, put additional text for direction or clarification. So here, my first section is project basic information, and I can put in rich text formatting, so I can bold, underline, add color. A lot of the same things you can do in instructions you can do here to help break up my form and give it some more body and structure. So sections you will not find over here. What you do find are date, time, text, a variety of text fields. We'll talk about those in a second. We also there's also then numbers. So there's integer, and then there's sign numbers as well. Scroll a little too fast. And then there's sign numbers. So let's talk about how all those things interact then with these other use types. So as I already indicated, section, there's no tie back to that table. So you can have as many sections as you want and or need, unlimited. For date, there are 8 date fields that are stored on that table. So at the end of the day, your form can only have 8 dates on it because there's no more date fields to be used. Time, the same number, there's 8 time fields that are built in that you can use. And then when you talk text, there are 7 different text lengths, and they all function a little bit differently. So text length of 4, which you'll see here, and if I come back to my table, go back to the first, you'll see that there's 10. The text for field is actually shared amongst the types of for prompt, code, and yes, no. So if I choose a yes, no field, which I do have on here, even though it says length of 1, that data actually gets stored in a text for field behind the scenes. If I choose code, it gets stored to a text for field. So there are 10 text for fields that are shared amongst code, yes, no, and prompt. So you need to be mindful when you're using text for, do I really need 4 characters or can I get away with more? Because if I'm going to have a lot of codes or yes, no's, then I have a limited number that I can actually use. Text 5 is shared amongst just prompts. Text 10 can be allowed for prompts, and text 20 can be used for prompts. There are 10 text 5 fields, 15 text 10, and 15 text 20. So there's more of those than there are the text 4s. And then for the text 30, 50, and 254, there's 10 of the 30 and 50 and 5 of the 254. I say all of this because when you start adding fields to your form, and we actually finally activate the form, that's going to impact which one of these fields are used, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But the way the system decides which one of these to use pretty much has to do with sequential order, which impacts what updates we can make once we activate a form. So we talked about the text. For the numeric fields, you'll see I've got some numeric fields in here. Like here, I've got a number 15.4. You can also do a sign number. Sign numbers are shared with the same numeric fields. So there are 10 number 9 fields, there's 10 7.2 fields, and there's 8 15.4 fields. And then the sign numbers share the exact same length. They're just and they're shared again within our number fields that are towards the back here at the end of this table. So they're all shared amongst these fields here. Get back to my form. So texts are pretty straightforward. They allow you to store text from an individual user. The length will obviously restrict it. When we choose prompt allows us to attach a prompt table to that particular field. So it would force the user to use a value from this table. We'll talk about the prompt control here in a second. The yes, no is just that. It puts a checkbox on the page for that field, and it becomes a simple checkbox that the user can check on or off. And then the code field allows you to put your own list of values in. So it's like a translate field, but it doesn't actually go to the translate structure of the database. It actually sits behind the scenes on some other forms tables. So I can put in my codes to represent my various buckets that I want somebody to be able to choose from. So once I've gotten my label, my use, type, and length set, I got my field status here. There are only 2 field statuses that can appear on a form. There's either active or in design. When something is in design, you have full flexibility in range of what you want to do to that field. So I can change the use type, I can adjust the length if that's appropriate, and I can actually even remove it as well. Once it's activated, your ability to make modifications to that field are severely limited. So once we see an activated form, I'll come back in and show you guys what we can and can't do. Just know that it's severely limited. Once you also activate, all these different use types that you've selected and the lengths get applied behind the scenes. So the ones where I'm using text for or code of that nature, the way the system decides what it's going to use is it comes back and it looks at our field names themselves and it puts them in it sorts them in order. So if we use text for as an example, I've got 1 through 10. If I actually sort these alphabetically, it would be 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I'm using 2 text for fields, the ones that are in use are text for 1 and text for 10. Then 2 through 9 would be available for use. So if there's also configuration tables you can look at behind the scenes to see which ones are used, but the logic is it basically uses them in sequential order, but really alphabetical order. Because once we break the double-digit barrier, it shifts things 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5. So keep that in mind too. You don't get to choose what fields are used in terms of from that table. It automatically picks them based off of the attributes you've chosen. Within the details link itself then, depending on the field type you have, allows you to do different things. So with section, we kind of already saw that we can put in more information. So here I have a basic header, but within another section, I can have more robust text. So I can look at, say, finance only, and I believe I have more body here. So I can the section to be completed by finance users. So it gives you more ability to, it gives you the ability to put more detail in for your users. Other options you have under the design details here is you can make a field required. Just like on the normal pages, if a field is required, it'll mark it with an asterisk so a user can identify those fields as required fields. You can force the value they enter to be all uppercase if you desire. If you've chosen prompt, this is where you attach the prompt table, and then you have something called prompt control. Now, prompt control can be assigned to pretty much any use type except section. The idea behind prompt control is that you can use the value that's entered into this field. So in this case, the project business unit is going to drive the prompt selection on my project table. So where I'm using my project as a prompt record, it's going to look at the business unit I key on my form and limit my results to that value or that set. So we'll see that when we start filling out the form. Again, in our code values, we kind of already showed that here. This is where you would actually then key in what those values are. And that's about all you can do on the details. The up and down arrows allow you to change the position of the field. So if I wanted project basic information second, I could just shift that down or move something else up. So this kind of dictates where they show up on the page. The move to right or move to left column. So this is really basically dictating, does the field show up on the left-hand side of the screen or the right-hand side of the screen? Basically, the screen is divided in half, and it can either show up on the left or the right. You also have the ability, if you want, to make everything a single column style. So everything you have on here will actually show up stacked one on top of the other. If you have anything in the right-hand column, though, be aware when you select this option, because this is at position 1, it would be stacked right under my project basic information of position 1, and so on and so forth. So if you wanted to have a different look, you would actually need to move all these up to the left-hand side, which you can do here with these options as well. You can move to left or right. Okay. Once we've got all of our fields in here, the next step we can go to is step 4, which is attachments. So the nice piece about this is if you have policies or anything that maybe gets associated with this form that maybe somebody has to fill out in more robust feature, or they need to read something, you can attach this to this form. That way you know the latest and greatest is always there. So in this case, we've got our capital policy attached that a user would be able to pull up if they needed to check a policy. They can do that straight from the form instead of having to navigate outside the system. Once you've attached, yes.
I have a quick question. Can you require someone to attach something to the form?
Natively, no. So we will see that forms that there can be things attached to the form as well, like attachments can be put back. That you could make that part of the approval process, that somebody needs to review that an attachment's there and deny approval or push back. But natively, you cannot require an attachment.
Thank you.
Sure. Once you've gone through steps 1 through 4, the 5th step is publish to a menu. So you get to decide where in your folder structure you want this form to live. From a security perspective, what this controls is 2 things. 1, security. So if I don't have access to, in this case, project costing, I would not have access to this form. Even if I had access to the form setup and design and all these other pieces, I would not have access to this specific form because I wouldn't have access to this area of the menu. So you have to make sure wherever you publish your forms that users are going to have access to that area of the system, or they're not going to be able to access the form. Just because you give them access to forms in general, which you could give them access to enterprise components forms, and there's a place to search and fill in forms from here, doesn't mean they're going to have the ability to access that form unless they can actually access where it sits in the menu. So keep that in mind as well from a security perspective. Once we've decided where in our menu it's going to live, we have to decide the approval process and what's going to happen to our form after the form is approved, if it is going through approval. So if we don't want our form to go through approval, we leave this area blank. We just don't put anything here at all. Our options, though, for the form when approval is attached is we can say do not lock down. What that means is that when the form's submitted and even when it's approved, it's still always editable. Most organizations do not choose this option who are running forms. The next option is lockdown after approval. A lot of organizations choose this one because within their approval process, they may want to allow additional data to be put in or modified or updated, so they want the form still active for those changes. And lastly, you can lock down after submit. So once the form's submitted, nothing can be changed by any approver downstream. So those are your three choices. The approver user list, if you are going to have approval, I'm going to leave it do not lock down, but I'm going to put approvals in anyway. So I'm going to put in my approval path. So I'm going to put in director, and I'm going to put in, oh, come on. Oh, there we go. Lisa, you said there's two questions. While I'm filling this out, I'm happy to answer the questions.
Okay. So the first question, kind of leading on off of the other one. So can you require someone to attach a form? Can you require someone to attach something to the form? Basically, can you require the user to attach a form during the approval process?
No, so same thing. It's not natively supported to require an attachment. So you could have a template attached to your form that they might have to fill out to answer questions, something like that. If you had additional questions that you couldn't embed into your form, or maybe it's some sort of calculator or something that you built in Excel, whatever. You can have a template like that attached, but you can't require it back on the form itself. Again, within your approval process, you could make that part of somebody's job to review. You could have a reviewer up front, and if that's not there, then it doesn't pass on, right? So we could put a reviewer here first before it made it to the director to say, no, you're missing this bit of information. You need to put this back. So you could look for it that way. Again, natively, it's not supported.
Okay. The comment was, we have requirements for someone to attach various forms before it can be approved, but you're saying that can't, not as it stands right now, that
correct.
You can't. Okay.
Correct. You can't require it.
Okay. Do you need to set up separate security roles for the forms, or can it be rolled into the current security roles?
Oh, it could be rolled in the current security roles. So as long as they have access to that area wherever you're placing the form, they would have access to the form. There might still be some pieces of there are still some pieces of form that you have to give them access to, like you do have to give them access to search, fill in a form, but you don't need to give them full access to all the other pieces within here, like design a form, manage forms, approve. You just need to give them access really to search, fill in a form, and review a form if you're having approvals attached. The rest of this could be skipped. And then they would have access to those pieces in the menu, wherever you have it set. Or if you're using Fluid, you could put tiles out there too on these forms on their homepage and actually create a tile for a specific form.
Okay. The next question, is this still only available to add new data, not update? Like adding a new vendor is okay through the form, but can I update an existing vendor using forms?
Oh, you're talking about CI. So we're going to talk about CI at the end, but to answer that question at a time, yes, it's still restricted to add only. They do not have an update feature available yet.
Okay.
So if you were going to create a form for updating vendor information, unfortunately, it does not support update.
Okay. The next question, if you had to change a field type after a form is in use, for example, a sign number replacing an integer, is that possible? If so, how is the legacy data entered previously handled? Is it converted?
I'm going to defer that one until we get through, because I am going to show you what you can and can't change with forms once you have them activated. Because once you activate them, you're kind of going down a confirmed path, but we'll talk about some solutions and possibilities.
Okay, and then last question.
It's a very good question about data integrity.
Can a form be attached to a certain menu? For example, can it be added to a self-service menu? Yep. Anywhere that your menu, anywhere in this menu, I can put a form. You just navigate to it and say that's where I want it to sit.
So yep, you can do that in self-service. Like you could put in employee self-service in HR or finance, either one. Yep.
Okay, that's it for the questions for now. If anyone has one more button. Can you have a radio button on these forms instead of a yes, no toggle?
No, its default is a yes, no checkbox, which you'll see because we're going to fill out this form once I get to that point.
Okay, all right. We will kind of hold the questions here, and then at the next break, we'll go through some more.
Okay. So I'm at the end of my train stop. I got my approval process. Said, do not lock down my form. This is the workflow that I want. I'm going to say okay. We're going to talk about this workflow too, because if you need to change this workflow later, we're going to talk about how you can do that, because doing it through the wizard is a hot mess and it doesn't work. Before you publish your form, because we've talked about now a couple times, once I activate my form, I'm sort of committed to this. You do have the ability to preview the form, and you also have the ability to jump right back in to redesign the form. So we're going to preview this form really quickly just so you guys can see what it looks like. And then I have a version of it that I've actually already activated. So here's my form. Now, a fluid form will look a little different. You see the subject, but you don't see the priority or the due date. Those are kind of get pulled out. In true native forms, the subject, priority, and due date are always there. You can't take these out. The subject itself is kind of required because it's one of the main search parameters used if people are trying to find forms later. So our general rule of thumb and recommendation is you tell somebody to put a meaningful value in there, something that's related to the form they're filling out. But something has to go there itself. So here you can see my sections. Anything that you see in blue and underlined are my sections. So I've got a basic section here. I've got one with a little more meat here. This is actually a section I've just layered it in between. Got a section here, one here, and I actually go further down and I've got one here with an example to help somebody understand what to fill out. So this is my chance to check my form and say, yep, I agree with everything that's here. The one thing you can't check, which bothers me, is you can't check workflow until you activate the form and actually test it and make sure it does what you want. So if you're thinking, oh, you can go to approval framework, you could, but you still require a form to push through that approval framework to validate. So until you activate the form, you really can't test your approval framework and make sure your approvals are really going to function the way that you want. So just keep that in mind as well. I can check all these other things. I can make sure my lookup works. You know, handy dandy little lookup here. And say, yep, my prompt works. All these other pieces are working. It's great, but I can't check my workflow. So I'm going to pretend like I activate this form, and I actually built another version of this form that I've already activated because I didn't want to have to do it twice because it can be tedious. So I'm going to fill out this form. So we'll search fill in a form, add a new value. Wait patiently. So here's my form. We're just going to call it test and test name, project. This is at US 001. And I'm going to do a lookup for my department. And we're going to say headquarters. So you can see all these asterisks here. These are all required fields for me. And I'm going to do construction renovation. And my project start date is, we're going to say October 1st with a completion date of 12/31/2020. Project COVID-19 office safety measures. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. Funding source, my corporate, my total budget amount, we're going to spend $250,000. Now, some things you guys might notice is if you notice when I pick project, business unit, and department, you'll notice I don't get the descriptions there, right? So when you do a lookup, you can do that, but you're not going to get the related description or view with this on a form. Whereas if you were to fully build something custom yourself, you'd probably pull that in there. So keep that in mind, that anything that's attached to a prompt, you'll get a valid value, but it's not going to show you that value on the form itself. If you wanted to see it, you'd have to click on the looking glass again. It's asking for us to break it down. So we're going to say this is 200,000 and this is 50,000. The more information down here at the bottom, this is also standard on all forms and it's always there. So keep that in mind as well. So I as a user have filled this out. The rest is finance only. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And my page is saving. So once I hit save, I can preview my approval here. I can submit. I'm just going to go ahead and, so if I'll preview it anyway, we'll see the workflow like normally you could anywhere else. So again, it uses the native approval framework engine for our workflow. I can submit from here, so I'm going to do that. And so now I'm going to sign out and push this along just so you guys can kind of see that process. So I kept the workflow pretty simple too. Just like other approval framework engine, you can decide if you want to send out email notifications, if it's going to go to the work list, or just one or the other, or both. So email notifications can come out, works just like any other approval framework. Search. So I've got a couple out here. Some have already been approved. Here's my pending one. So from here, if I'm an approver, I can actually see the form from here. I can go into it and take a look if I want to. Because we did not lock ours down, all these fields are editable, so I could make a change if I wanted to. Like normal approval, I can actually put a comment in, or I can deny from here. I'm just going to go ahead and approve it and send it on to Judy. We'll sign out. Are there any other questions while I'm popping in and out as fictitious people?
There are. So the first one, is there a way to link forms to other forms since the field types are limited?
There are not.
Okay.
Good question.
I know you said that you can only add and not update. Does that mean you cannot add a new row in a record even with a new effective date?
I haven't gone that far with it, to be honest. So you may be able to, since it's a new row and not an update, an existing row. We'd have to try. We can try it. I've got some tests here. We can be dangerous and just try it live in front of the world and see what happens.
Okay. The next question, I missed how you got this to be in two separate columns. Was that part of one of the steps? When I tried to build one time, it was all in one column and looked terrible, but this looks nice and better spaced.
So yes, we'll go back into the form design. When you build your form, you have to decide if you want to be on the left or right-hand side. At the top is the left and below that is the right. You have to consciously start putting stuff in on the right-hand side if you want to do that, which is one of the limitations on the fluid tile designer that you can use. There is no left or right. You just drag fields in, which is nice and quick, but it gives you a little less flexibility in design.
Okay. Why are the instructions and attachment on separate tabs?
I don't know. I did not build it. That is the way it comes natively with the tool. You actually probably also wouldn't like that if you'll notice when I filled it out, the instructions were second and not first. The form was first, followed by instructions, followed by the attachment.
Okay. Is there an audit framework that can track if a form is modified later?
You could turn on audit. You could build an audit against it because the table's there. So you would just be a matter of turning on an audit to that table. Because once you save it, the data's there. So yes, you could turn on an audit to see if it got changed during the approval cycle.
Okay. And then last question for now, does an approver have to go to review approved forms page, or can the approval request be shown on the fluid approvals tile with the other
it'll get picked up there. I just went here because that's what I had already kind of ready to go. But yeah, it can be picked up there.
Okay.
Like all your other stuff. So as the final approver in this, because the way I built my process here, I'm saying the capital budget team is going to come in here then, let's say right before they approve this, they actually create the project. So this would give them the ability to say, yep, we put this under US 001, and I'm going to say it's attached to project, well, I don't know, all projects, why not? That makes a whole lot of sense. So if you have instances in your form where you're trying to tie it back to other stuff that would happen theoretically post-approval, this is where you may not want to fully lock down the form until after final approval, because it gives that final team a chance to update and make modifications or give that last bit of detail to tie everything back. In this case, we're also said, well, the capital budget team looked at this and said, yeah, user, you didn't know, Charlie, you don't know anything about accounting, so it's not $250,000. We're going to adjust your amount. So we're going to make it, here was the original budget amount. We're going to actually lower it by $25,000 because you actually had expenses in there that we're not going to capitalize. And it was all in IT, so 25. And then Charlie doesn't know anything, so we fixed it. So then I can say, okay, and I can do my final approve. And so then that's fully locked to the table. But once you save it, the first time you save it in terms of that audit question again, it goes to that form_SD table in an initialized state, so it's unapproved or what, and it's pending approval. So you can check then and put audits against changes at that point. So now that we've got this filled out, let's talk about what happens when you've got an active form out there and somebody's like, hey, this form's great, things have changed, we need to update it. That's when you're going to cringe a little bit and say, well, I can change some things about forms. So let's go in and check out our active form and what we can and can't do. So we're going to go to design a form. Here's my activated one. I have to go through the wizard every time, which is super great. So if you notice, now that all these say activated, I cannot change the type or the length, okay? For section headers, it's the only one that, even though it's activated, I can actually delete that. I can change labels for everything. I can change a prompt record, so where my project BU is a prompt record, I can change that and say, no, I want to prompt off something else, or I want to assign it another prompt control, I want it to control another field. But as far as changing these, you cannot do. Now, you can get clever and go behind the scenes and update this field status to InDesign, which would allow you to make changes. But you are correct from a data integrity perspective. If you do that, you're either going to orphan something out there, or you're going to just create a bunch of problems. Our recommendation and what we'd like to see in the application actually is a clone form process that allows you to clone this, make another version, or better yet, effective date the whole thing so you can more easily make changes, but probably just a clone, and give you the ability then to clone it. Everything would be in the design phase at that point, and then it would allow you to make modifications. Because the other thing you'll notice is on your codes, and they fixed this in the fluid form piece, but it's not fixed in the native portion. You can't delete nor inactivate a code. So once you have a code out here, it's always out here. So if you don't want people to use it anymore, you can say inactive, but you can't take it out. Now here you could go behind the scenes and set this to InDesign. Anything that is InDesign here will not show up in your dropdown. So that is one way around that for codes. But really the best way to do it would be to make a clone of the form and give it like a version number, if you will, and then make the changes that you need to make. Otherwise, you really want to make sure that your form is right, which is hard to do sometimes when people are still building forms and making modifications. To answer the other question about the left and right and to make it pretty, so here's my left column, here's my right column. As you add, it just keeps adding to the left. If you want to move stuff to the right, you play around here. Now, one of the other things you can play around with sections is spacing, right? So I think one of these I actually played around with spacing. I moved it down, so it moved everything with it. So with a section, you can actually carriage return stuff down. Like I could move this down, and if I force that down, all of these fields would actually shift down as well on the page. So if you're trying to get stuff to line up, you might just put a blank section in there with a bunch of carriage returns to push stuff down so it lines up side by side. We've done that before. It's a little playing with the formatting. You have to do a lot of previewing to make sure it's going to the right place, but that is an option. Any other questions about an active form? Oh yeah, so this one I entered down a little bit there. We're also going to go back and look at the approval framework to figure out, well, how do we make changes to that? So here I got a couple carriage returns here.
Charlie, this is Lisa. We have a couple questions kind of related to that. On the more towards about the approval process. On the approval workflow, is there flexibility on the approval routing?
Yes, but you have to do it after you've built it. So if you read People books, it'll tell you that it can only have one stage, one path. That's not really entirely true. You just have to know that you have to go in and build it yourself, right? So when we went to that approval step, step 6, what the application does, let me get to my enterprise components here. Anyone who's familiar with approval framework, you could really do whatever you want with it because it sits on the exact same engine. It uses the same configuration. It's just a matter of you don't do it within the wizard. So if I come to enterprise components, approvals, approval process setup, here we go. So everything sits under the process ID form. And you'll notice I have a bunch out here. So your definition ID is based off the form name that you give it. So here's my demo that I started with. Here is my active one. There's my location. Got a couple other ones. If I needed to make a change, the reason you can't use the wizard is because if you use the wizard, it's trying to basically update an effective dated row of 1/1/1900, and it's only putting out the steps, okay? And you can make this more robust. You just have to come in here and actually do it. So if I wanted to do something more robust than just steps or have more criteria, whatever, and route more effectively, I can do that. But what I have to do is I need to clone this approval process, make it 1/1/1901 or whatever my date conventions are really. And then I can come in here and fill a lot more of this out. But you need to be careful because the way it's running is it is looking for this definition ID. I think if I look at definition criteria, it might be there. So you have full control. So it's looking at form type and it's looking at this here. So I can very easily go down in these other areas for stages and paths, add more criteria if I need to route things the way I really need them to route. So you're not bound to just steps. If you needed to add more steps, again, you would come out here, clone it, and add the additional steps that you want. Interestingly enough, the form wizard won't show you that revised workflow. It will always show you this row only. So if you ever go through Form Wizard and you look at your approval after you've changed it, you will only ever see this set of data. So it kind of gets unsynced, but you can still definitely make changes. And like the rest of PeopleSoft, it uses effective dating to pull the right set of data.
Okay. The next question, can it be pushed back instead of denying in the AWE stage? Don't see the pushback ability. Is that because it's not configured or forms do not have the ability to push back?
I don't think it's available. I think it is only deny unless you go further up the chain, but I think it does. I do believe it's only deny that's allowed. It might be not configured. I didn't check. I just used everything that was fully out of the box here. I didn't go back and really dig into the transaction registry. We can check and see what's there, but I don't think it's available.
Okay. The next question, we have a need for people to select an approval from a list of people, which we have defined as directors. So we allow people to select from a large list of directors. Is that possible, or is it predetermined who that approval will be?
So I guess the better question I would have is, how do they pick today? Are we using the approval framework engine for them to pick? Or is that a customization put in for them to pick that person?
Let me see if Daniel. It is in a different system. It's a .NET.
Okay. I don't have a lot of experience with the .NET in terms of forms. I've only ever used the delivered approval framework engine. So if you had to select somebody, I would ask you, how are they selecting? Is there more logic we can build in so the director is picked dynamically and we could build a user list that's maybe more dynamic?
Okay. The next question, we have some forms for our employee health where we have to ask very lengthy questions. So a label for those fields can be 30 to 40 characters. How have you handled these situations where labels are lengthy?
So yeah, that's a good question. So what I would probably do is either attach a section below it or above it, or even next to it, because you have more character space. Let me go back into our form here. That's not what I want. We're getting tight on time. I want to make sure I show everything here. I do want to show the CI process. Just trying to get into design mode here. So for example, if you recall in our form, I had this huge example of text, right, that I wanted to do. So where people are filling this out, I have a section here called capital budget breakdown. So what I would probably do is use a section to do my lengthy question. You actually have up to 100 characters on that label, by the way. This is only 18, but if you go into the details, you have up to 100 characters. May still not be enough, and you can't really format it, right? So if you want to format it, I would use a section on the left, and then I would use a field on the right, and I would probably use another section to force that field to line up to my question, since this is going to break down, right? And it actually wraps text to a certain degree once it only gets so wide, but that would probably be how I would handle that, with a couple sections and some yes/no fields or text 30s for the answer, and get it on the right-hand side to line up next to the question. So you trick the form into believing that those are actually on the same side, left or right, but you force them to line up. So you would just basically sit down and say, okay, I have my another section, I'm just going to enter down, and then when you go look at it, it would be forced next to the left-hand side. So we've got 3 minutes left. I would really like to show the CI, and then I'm happy to stay on longer if people want to answer additional questions. So within the true forms or native forms, if you will, versus fluid, you can do a CI build out, right? So if that's all where I want to be. So once you build your form, you have to have your form first. So to be able to do a CI mapping, you have to have your form built, and it has to be active. So you're already committing yourself at that point. You can build the form, and then you basically find the right CI that you want. And as we discussed before, add is the only option. We'll see here in a second. I've got one built already for location. So you find your CI, you get the CI properties, which populates this. You can take out the fields that you don't need, and then you map your form fields to the appropriate field on your component interface. And then when you fill out a form, which we're going to do real quick in 2 minutes, we'll see how fast I can actually go, because it's not a very complicated form. The reason I want to show you the CI is because you actually have to commit it yourself. So even after approval, it does not auto commit and load it. So we'll do test, we'll do share. We're going to do ABC 456. Active. Test. say Main Street. My state is got a prompt control off of country, so I can do my right state lookup, by the way. That was just another example of prompt control. And then just do one, save, submit. I do have an approver on this because I want to show you guys how this is going to function with approvals. Come on. So we'll approve this. Apologies for the lag here. So I can approve this, and I can go to the form. When you have something attached to a CI, once the form's approved, now you can either have the final approver do this, or you would have to write a custom process to do this. Otherwise, you need to save and post form. What this does is it actually fires off the CI, so it's not an automatic. So then I get a message, it's successfully been done, and I also see that it is linked to my location. It's actually backwards though, because it's going to give me an error message when I try and look this up, because it's going to put the set ID and the location differently. But just to show you guys that it is here, do ABC, under finding existing value. So there's our new one. And here is our form. Now I'm happy to test with others in a moment. I did just want to show the HR side of the fence too, really quickly. That's on 858. Just so you guys can see it. And we'll talk about the fluid tile form builder, because I've seen other presentations on that. It works well, but you really need all your building blocks in place. And you'll see some limitations on it as well. So I come to, again, the form setup in the menus under enterprise component, that's all there. But just to show the fluid design forms. Once I've designed a form very similar to the native, I can edit it from here. The problem I'm going to run into, though, is that, again, I'm limited on what I can change. I can't actually remove codes if I have a code field, but I drag and drop here. So the nice thing is you have the ability to see, hey, what does this look like on a phone versus a tablet, sideways tablet? That's nice. But from a field perspective, I can add a new text field, but it just goes left to right. I can't actually force anything from one side to the other. The other issue is if I put a divider in, this is nice, right? I can put a divider in and I can relabel that divider header, but I lose all my rich text formatting. I can't do any of that here. So there's pros and cons to the fluid version of this, and I'm hoping to see more functionality here and some other things, obviously. I think it has a little ways to go to catch up to the other one, but there are some nice features here for doing a quick build form, but I don't know if that's really where anyone's at yet, of just throwing a form out there in 5 minutes, because that's to me what this is for. Because if you don't have your prompts and everything, again, you have to exit out of this and get that set up. Okay, so I know we're a little past. If there are people still with me, I'm happy to answer other questions. I'm going to log out of this and go back into finance, and we'll test to see what happens if we can add on top of an existing row for that location I just created.
Charlie, for right now, we have one more question in the chat. What are some common examples that companies are using PeopleSoft forms for?
So this capital request form is potentially one of them. Lost badge, if you need a badge replacement, you know, a matter of saying, okay, I need to submit a badge to get it replaced and having that flow through. Those are two off the top. So you're still talking relatively simple forms, right? Nothing too complex. Location, another one we've seen that used where people are, you know, setting up new locations or requesting new locations. That's going through a form. Because so especially like on the finance side, finance offers you chart field forms, right? So you can do the design, a business process request basically, which allows for chart fields, so department account, any chart field, but things like location you can't do. So we're seeing it for other config type fields. It's potentially being used. You just have to be careful about field limitation, right? And that's one of the biggest takeaways I'd like everyone to take is there is a limitation to the number of fields and type of fields you have. So you really need to look and make sure that the form you're trying to create is going to be able to be built with those limitations in the back of your mind. Like, how many of these do I actually have? How creative can I be to get this to be filled out? But there are definitely, there's value to it. It's just a matter of using it, you know, use the right tool for the right job. If you need a lot of edits and audits and things around your form, then the native form builder is probably not for you. If you want to have very robust page interaction, then that's probably not the tool for you. You probably need a full custom built page. All right, so I know I have some handful of people still with me. So we're going to go in here and we're going to see what happens with our CI here. Let's see if I can break it. Probably will. One of the other things I'd like to mention for anyone still on, I meant to do this at the start of the presentation. So Aspire's happy to do demos on other areas of PeopleSoft beyond something like form features. If there's actually a whole module you might be interested in seeing something on and you haven't had a chance to dig into it yourselves, or there's a new feature or other features that maybe have been out for a while you just haven't had a chance to explore. For any current, future clients, we're happy to sit down and do a demo for you about that so you can see the functionality that you might be interested in.
Charlie, I have another question. Is there a way to search for a previous form by employee ID or user ID of the person that submitted it?
I don't think natively, but you could build a query and see who the form submitter was. These are our only search fields for an existing form. So if you wanted to see who submitted it, now you can make that their subject. You could say all users have to put that subject in, but you're probably better off just building a query to do that, because that'll have you can find out who submitted it from there.
It says, can this form be incorporated with activity guides in PeopleSoft HCM?
I have not done that yet, so I can't speak to it.
Okay, and then related to, is there a way to search by employee ID or user ID? The question is, actually, we would want to pull up the form itself. So I guess there's not a way to search by user ID or employee ID and pull the form up. You would just run a report to see, is that correct?
Correct. So if you're trying to find something to approve for a specific person, you would either have to know what subject they used, obviously the form they used themselves. Again, the search is very basic. So this search doesn't go into the details of what might be on your form. Now you could build like a query, or you could have something, you know, like a home page, like a pivot grid or something that has hyperlinks right into it. You could do it that way. So you could actually build something off of a form based off user or other input fields that could then pull up and then it could hyperlink into where you need to go. You could do that. Or you could customize the search page, but that would be more difficult because forms are all different. So it looks like the answer is no, by the way, based off the error message that we're getting, because it already exists. Even though I'm doing a date past what I had, it still won't let me do it. So the answer is no. sadly not.
I don't see that we have any other questions. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a live question, please feel free. If not, we are recording. We have been recording this session. So if you would like a copy of it, just you can send an email to me. That I believe my contact information was on the meeting invite. And I can also get you the contact information for Charlie if you have questions for him directly.